Welcome to the personal Tanya. Today's the first day of the month of Shvat, and we're up to the second part of chapter 18 as we confront the topic of today's Tanya, the paradox of the Jew. The paradox of the Jew. You see, Jews are filled with paradox. On the one hand, we're highly opinionated, we're very cerebral, yet at the same time, we're full of faith, and I'll prove it to you. You see, many Jews are completely secular, yet when push comes to shove, we find that they're willing to die for their faith, the faith that supposedly they don't practice, or maybe they don't believe in. We find that Jews might not be observant. We're the least observant group in America, yet deeply moved by anti-Semitism against our fellow co-religionists. Today's Tanya gives us the answer to why that is, because the root of the paradox is within ourselves. You see, as Jews, we have within us not only a powerful seat of intellect, which is part of our soul. Remember, our soul is made up of part wisdom and part emotion. So we have a tremendous focus, a foundation of intellect within us, but at the same time, we also have God's infinite light, which is radiating within us. Today's Tanya goes down a little bit more into the weeds to understand where specifically that lies. And it's a very meaningful understanding, a very meaningful conversation. You see, we learned already in chapter 3 that the wisdom component of the soul is made up of three parts. The idea, the burst of inspiration, called Chachma. Then there's Bina, which is the comprehension of that idea. And then Das, which is taking that idea from the mind and allowing it to be something that we feel in the heart. We reach Das, the third level, through meditating on the concept that we already understood. And we reach Bina, the second point. We go from the idea to understanding, to comprehension, through thinking about the idea that we just expand and flesh it out. But how do we reach the idea, the level of Chachma, the very beginning of the soul, which is the highest point of intellect? Where does that idea actually come from? Today's Tanya teaches us that that idea is actually a gift from God. It is God's infinite light that shines within us. And what motivates that gift from God, what initiates, what triggers it within us, is humility. You see, an idea comes to us typically after we ask a question, after we have a problem, and we say, what are we going to do? And when you have the question mark and you say, I don't know, it's then that humility draws down God's infinite light, God's blessing, like a lightning strike, which is so powerful that we can't even process it. It takes us a few seconds. You see, this strike from above, this idea that comes from God, is so powerful that we cannot even be disturbed during the duration of its arrival. Imagine you having a burst of inspiration, and then somebody disturbs you and wants to ask you a question. You can't say, 1 second, I'm gonna answer your question, and then come back to my idea. You'll lose it. You'll lose it. What you need to do is you need to be fully focused on that lightning strike to sort of capture it before you can divert your attention elsewhere. If you distract from it, you lose it because it's not even yours yet. You haven't grasped it. It's a gift from above. The attribute of Chachma, which is the highest of the first three, the highest of the three levels of wisdom within our souls. Chachma means humility. The very word Chachma can be rearranged to read Koachma, which means the power of what? The power of nothing. There is no ego when a person says a statement ending with a question mark. When a person asks a question, he says, I don't know something. You're expressing humility, and that is the seat that draws, is the lightning rod that draws God's infinity. Because think about it this way. The next level is Bina. Bina is comprehension. That's filled with ego. As I confidently flesh out every detail of the answer that I have now had an idea, and I've downloaded the idea, but I'm trying to understand it. So there's a lot of ego involved in here. In the Bina level, as I'm becoming very comfortable. But when it comes to Chachma, there is no ego. I'm just saying, I don't know. And the gift then comes from above. Bina, therefore, is something where ego is dominant. It's limited to its own comprehension, and therefore it's not able to contain infinity. It's only Chachma, which asks a question that says, I'm open, I don't know, that is open to receive without prior condition, and hence the Chachma level, the level of idea, is open to anything, even to God's infinite light, because there's no prior condition, there's no prejudice, there is no pre-existing condition that the light of God has to settle into. On the contrary, you're saying, I'm an open book, I'll take whatever you give me, and that's where God's infinity is able to dwell without becoming corrupted or modified through any pre-existing ego. Turns out then that Chachma, the first level of wisdom, of intellect, is the meeting point between man and his maker. I mean, this is an unbelievable idea, because where ego begins in Bina, in comprehension, is where the mortal separates from man. I'm reminded of Michelangelo's depiction of God's creation, where he creates God. I mean, he does depict God, which is something that we Jews don't do. But there's one point I'd like to point out where he points God's finger touching Adam, but it's not quite touching Adam, because there's a little gap in between, because the maker can never quite touch. Sorry, the man can never quite touch his maker. But here seems to be the neural transfer point where maker connects with man, and that is the moment that ego begins. That's where mortal separates from the maker. Where there is humility within the man, that is where the maker, where God still shines within you. And that's how Tanya today explains that God's infinite light is present within us, inside the attribute of Chachma, because that is the one part of us which is humble. And this humility draws the God's infinite light within us, and that's what's present in every single Jew. Even ignorant Jews, even non-observant Jews, still are filled with faith, whether they like it or not. Even non-believers, and that's why non-observant Jews will be willing to die for what they believe in, even if they don't have any understanding of it, because their faith comes not from their understanding, from Bina. It comes from their Chachma, which is that first attribute of humility, where God's infinite light already shines within us. And that's what an amazing observation for us to come to, is that we draw infinity within us through humility. If you want to experience God's speed, God's blessing in your work, in your family, in your marriage, in your relationships, in everything you touch, it's humility that will draw God's infinity within you, because ego is defined and thus repels the undefinable power of God Almighty. Humility, which has no form, is the perfect catalyst, the lightning rod to attract the power, the undefinable power of God Almighty. And thus we've resolved that paradox. We have both. We have both intellect and we have faith within each and every one of us, and both are necessary. We need both wisdom and faith. Wisdom powers our behaviors on top of a rock-solid foundation of unshakable faith. In fact, Chabad, the word Chabad means wisdom, as opposed to Emunah, which is faith, which comes naturally to all Jews. All Jews have faith naturally built in within them. The question is how much wisdom, how much understanding, how much feeling of godliness you have within you. That is what the Tanya is all about. It's the blend of energy, which is a rock-solid foundation of faith, allowing a construct, a building of knowledge, of wisdom, of understanding, of appreciation, that together creates the perfect pairing to become the perfect Jew. That's a wrap. Let's try to apply. You can do this.